Section 4 is basically a complete masterclass on its own. PML tutor Yannick will build all essential sounds for this year's festival season with you. He shows you how to layer unique combinations and gives away tons of writing techniques plus music theory background. After taking this class, you have everything at hand to write powerful hooks that simply work. He also gives you an intro to Serum in case you're new to that. I'm really excited, so let's dive right in.
Hi there, my name is Yannick Mount and super happy to be back here on Production Music Live. Today we're going to have a look at the production and the sound design part of melodic techno, leads, bass and plugs and all kind of different synthesizers. And secondly, how to write melodies with those leads. So I'm super happy that you are here and spend time with me today. So all the different Ableton files are available in the download section. So feel free to get this content. We are going to make all of the sound design inside Serum. So if you don't have Serum, I would recommend you purchasing it. It's a very versatile and nice synthesizer. I'll give you a quick overview of what we're going to learn today. So first we're going to have a look at Serum as a general synthesizer. So all the different aspects. This is more for newbies and people who are not that used with subtractive synthesis, which is no problem at all. That's why I'm explaining it to you. So if you are super into subtractive synthesis and you know how all the different modules work within each other, you can skip this part, of course. So first we're going to have a look at the general synthesis, and in the second part we're going to explore 7 or more patches which really, made a big difference in melodic techno. So these patches, they all go into the direction of like Afterlife and all those big melodic techno labels. So they really, in the last years, they developed a completely new style. So you hear this rat-tat-tat-tat lead kind of rhythm based, pitch bended, weird leads everywhere in every melodic techno production. So this is what we are going to learn today. So this whole course will be made in Ableton Live, but if you are using a different DAW, this is no problem. You can easily transfer this knowledge. I made myself some nice green tea, so cheers and let's dive into Ableton Live. Here we are inside Ableton Live. I've loaded up an instance of Serum right here, so I'm just going to scale this a little bit higher. Alright, so let's start with our very basic course here, subtractive synthesis. So this is not really only a subtractive synth, but a little bit more. What is subtractive synthesis? It means we're subtracting parts of the sound and creating a new sound in the way we are subtracting. So we have a waveform, for example, a wave coming from our first oscillator, which is oscillator A. It's always turned on per default. So if you have a listen, just enable our record arm here and I'll just play back just one single note with my keyboard of my laptop here. So this is just how very basic initialized preset of nearly every subtractive synth will sound. It's just in saw wave that it's just going directly into your DAW and then outside into your headphones. So now we'll go through the different modules of our synth step by step. So let's start. As I said, we have oscillators. So oscillator comes from oscillating, and if something is oscillating, it's creating a tone. So this is just the basic ingredient of synthesis. We need something to work with. This is like our basic ingredient. Within our oscillator A, which is this whole unit here, you can see it's separated by those lines, by those outlines here. We have a lot more settings that we can dial in. So we can choose to transpose the octave down or up. So this is possible in a range of -4 to +4 octaves. Then we can transpose semitones. So this is kind of as you would play a melody. And we can even adjust the fine-tuning of our oscillator. So this is just, octave is a very high jump in pitch, and then a semitone is a little bit less, and then the fine is a lot less. So it's just getting, more detailed. So fine is always measured in cent. So those are 100 cents above average. As you can see, if you hover over those settings, there's also a description of all those there. Okay, so what's the difference between coarse pitch and fine tune? Coarse pitch is not restricted by a semitone, so it's not inside the structure of octaves or semitones. So with this value, you can just explore pitch freely. Alright, so I don't necessarily just want to, go through all those settings and just tell you what they are doing, but I also want to tell you what you can use them for. Why should we change an octave inside our oscillator if we can just play in a different octave on our keyboard or whatever MIDI is coming in? Well, if you have two oscillators enabled, for example, if I enable the second oscillator, we could, detune those oscillators by an octave. And now we have not just a sound that's double as loud, because we've just doubled the exact same wave, but we've added a lower octave, which just makes the whole sound a little bit fuller. So this is pretty cool. The same thing happens if you choose to just detune the second oscillator by a couple of semitones. So if we go up 7 semitones, which equals a fifth, so a fifth is a very constant interval, then both of those oscillators will blend with each other, and together they will sound like this. So actually we're pressing just one note, but we're hearing two different pitches. Now we can even transpose the second oscillator an octave up or down. So that's very interesting. So I'll just deactivate oscillator B, and now let's focus on oscillator A fine tuning. So if you go to your LFO section down here, what does LFO mean? It's low frequency oscillator. So this is just also something that's oscillating. So in this case, it's creating this kind of a triangle wave. It's just going up here and it's going down there in the rate of a quarter. So it's always oscillating in this rate. That's a very interesting part about Serum here. So how can we apply this LFO to do something that we like? We can just pick this LFO just by clicking here on this arrows here, and now we can assign it to all those knobs that we can see. You can see there's this little plus sign appearing. So if we drag it on this fine tune knob, there will appear this blue line right up here, and this little it looks like a headphone symbol, but I guess it's just a circle that's not fully closed. So now have a listen. So now we've assigned LFO1 to our fine-tuning of our oscillator A. So the wave that's generated here is controlling fine-tune from the oscillator A in the rate of 1/4. So you can choose within the LFO section here. You have different LFOs right here. You have up to 4 LFOs. And you can see when I click LFO2, this line here disappears. But there's still a little light that's indicating that there is something that is controlling the fine tune. So if you want to check out what I've assigned LFO1 everywhere on my synthesizer, what is it controlling, you can see it because it's highlighted in blue. So let's have a closer look at our LFO, because it's important to understand the different settings of the LFO. So we can then use this LFO to control our fine tuning of our oscillator A fine pitch, to create some nice, more dirty and warm analog feeling, which comes from pitch variation over time. Alright, so let's have a look at LFO1. LFOs. As I said, LFO means low frequency oscillator, and here you can just, easily pick those points here and drag them to the top and to the bottom to make the curve more concave or convex, and it's the same thing here. So you can just, you have points and you have these middle points that just control the shape of the curve. So if you want to create a second point, you just double click anywhere and you can just drag it here freely. That's interesting, and we're going to have a look at this later on. You can really create nice shapes inside an LFO and assign them to a certain parameter, which then follows the shape of this LFO. If you want to have this point locked to a certain value, you can just press Option and it will lock, as you can see, to whatever. This is like a division by 8 inside the rate of a quarter note. So yeah, you can just sync it to your host tempo. Next thing is, if you want to sync it to this host tempo, you can choose by which grid you want to do this, and you can just increase this grid by certain values. You can divide this whole quarter here by 16, or you can divide it by 3. This is a place where you can experiment a lot. This really gets interesting if you have like lower rate values. So you have like 4 bars or something, and you see this goes up. Now you may want to have a finer grid because you want to do more variation in like shorter time values. Great. Then you have your envelope modes, I would call it. So now if I press a button, I'll just set this back to quarter. This just starts and it keeps running. If I choose envelope, it will stop after it's done one time. And if I choose trigger, it will restart every time I trigger a new node. And with off, it will just go on without considering my MIDI information. And my gate in means I'm giving the signal for the node to start. All right, you can, like per default, you can just leave it where it is. This is just an explanation if you really want to dive deep into the synth. All right, so let's continue. Now it gets interesting because now we have this BPM mode here, and you can turn this off. So now the rate here on the right side changes from normal time divisions, musical time divisions, which are quarters, half note, bar, 2 bar, and fast, whatever that means, to hertz. So now, if you have a listen, if I change this from a quarter to hertz, you can make this really fast vibrato. If we have a look at our next button here, this is called rise, and this just means it takes a certain time until the LFO starts working. So if I dial in 2 seconds, it will start after 2 seconds. And it's not only starting after 2 seconds, it's rising up to the highest point in a time of 2 seconds. So that's very interesting if you want to smooth out some LFO processes. So it gets more detuned over time. What I just said, if you want to delay something, you can, without it being risen, you can delay the LFO1 controlling the fine tune of our oscillator A by dialing in a certain node, by dialing in a certain value. And now you see it starts modulating the LFO after 2 seconds. So this can be interesting if you want to have really sudden changes in your LFO modulation. Another thing that's interesting is this smooth out button here. This just smooths out the LFO, which is not that interesting if we have just this is a pretty boring wave, but if we had something, that's more complicated, this, you do some really crazy stuff right here, then, sometimes it's really harsh. So let's just sync this to BPM again. And if we smooth it out, let's have a listen what happens. Nothing. Ah, yeah. Okay, so you have to re-trigger, so it's working. So now it's basically, just taking a value that's somewhere in the middle, and it's putting that value, and that value is then modulating our fine tuning. So if you want to smooth out your LFO a little bit, if it's too harsh, you're hearing those clicks, you can just smooth it out. It's more like and not like so that's what your LFO smooth is for. Alright, so another feature is the triplet mode here. So you can just enable the triplet mode by clicking it. Very easy. So if you enable triplets will be available here in your rate section. This is not affecting the grid up here. So the grid here is something completely different to your rate settings. And there's also your dotted rhythms. Dotted rhythms in general are just, for example, if you have an 8th note, it's 2 16th notes. If you have a dotted 8th note, it's 3 16th notes. So it's 1 8th note plus the half of the current value. So that's like the formula behind dotted rhythms. Okay, so this is how you enable triplets and dotted note values for your rate. So I'll just delete those points here, and now that we have a good overview over our LFO1, and we use this curve to control the fine tuning of our oscillator A. Back in the days, I didn't really experience those days, but that's what the old stars would say. I guess it was pretty hard building synthesizers that had a stable pitch, so they always were a little bit wonky-tonky, which made them super analog and a little bit richer. So humans tend to like sounds and more that are not totally perfect. So if we have some modulation here, it will sound good to the ear and will make the sound a little bit more interesting. So that's why we would use this LFO and control our fine-tuning here. Now I'll play back the note. It's pretty intense and it's super audible. So what we can do now is we go here and you can see if we hover over this weird headphone thing, you can choose to shorten or lengthen the blue line, and the blue line indicates the depth of the modulation that's applied from LFO1 to the fine-tuning. So this would mean a lot of pitch modulation, and this would mean nearly no, or now it's zero, no pitch modulation. So let's have a listen while I'll dial it like from the most extreme down to a less extreme value. So I think somewhere in the area between here it gets very audible, here it starts to sound musical. So something between 0 and 30 will work out for you. Perfect. So now we've applied LFO1 to our fine-tuning of our oscillator A to create some nice variants and a little bit more complexity. Perfect. So let's continue with our oscillator A and explore all of those settings we have down here. So what else do we have? We'll go from the top left to the down right corner. Okay, so let's start with the unison mode. So unison means just voices. So now it's basically just one single oscillator that is creating, and you can really visualize this. So it's now one oscillator in the middle that's creating this note. It's mono. If we crank up this value, it will add a second noise. And you can, as soon as you click here, this window will appear and it will create a second oscillator and will push the one to the left and the second one to the right. And now as you add more voices, your stereo field will get much bigger. Let's have a listen. And you can hear this little click when one voice is coming inside there. So you can choose to play up to 16 voices. Those voices can be detuned by a certain value. So if you pull down the detune to 0, it will kind of sound like a mono waveform signal, like if we had like 1, but not as clean. So have a listen to this. And now with 16. It's just a little bit different because they're all like, creating this kind of new saw wave because of phasing. So something between 0, or not really 0, but you can see you can just spread up the voices over your stereo field here. And this already can be a very nice effect. This is effect, for example, I've heard it in Boris Brecher's productions a lot. When I think he's automating this knob here to create tension inside breaks. So if you imagine, inside a break, then you come back. Cool. Blend mode is just defining the level differences between. There are either one or two main voices, as you can see. If you have a odd number here, or if you have an even number like 16, you will have two main voices. You can see those two main voices in the middle. If you have a odd number here, you have one voice in the middle. So generally speaking, I would recommend if you want to have a more stable voice in the middle, because for example, a stable voice in the middle will mean more monocompatibility. So for example, if you want to create something that's like a super wide bass, but it's still stronger in the middle, I would recommend using like something that has an odd number. So 15, 13, 11, 9, 7, 5, 3, or 1, but then you don't have anything in your stereo field left. So I'll just show you this example and we'll have a listen to this. Now it's really focused on the middle voice. Now the voice in the background, they appear. So this is something you can play around with. So let's jump down to the right corner to our panning and our level knob. So panning, I don't think that I have to really explain this. If you put your pan to the left, the sound will appear on the left side. If you put the panning to the right, the sound will appear on the right side. Now it's just on the right and everything in between. A little bit on the right, more in the middle, a little bit to the left, all the way to the left. And level, of course, just means no sound, more sound. Alright, so to explore phase and randomness, wavetable position, and this little extra knob down here, we'll have to choose a different waveform, which brings us to our drop-down menu right here. So Serum is a wavetable synth. Subtractive wavetable, it's just a mixture from different kind of synthesizers. You have, by clicking inside this waveform here, you can switch between two views. So this is the wavetable view. Currently there's just one wavetable loaded in here, but if you have a look inside our drop-down menu right here, when you click on the table that's called default, we can just go to something called spectral, and if you choose like the first ones, just for the sake of demonstration here, you can see there are a lot, there's like 1,000 or 100, I don't know how many. Yeah, so we have a lot of different waves here, and we can, with this wavetable position, we can scroll through those different waveforms. Some of them are louder, some of them are more squeaky, some of them are more resonant and higher. So you can also see this here. So this one seems pretty strong. So inside those wavetables, you can just look for a position, a wavetable position, as this knob is called, that fits your needs. That either it sounds strong because you want to have something that's stronger, and what do we mean by strong? It's just a little bit louder. So this one is stronger than, now it's like somewhere in the background. Now it's stronger again. But interesting could also be, we could, control this wavetable position by an LFO. So if we choose LFO1 to control our wavetable position, let's have a listen. Now it's very, very fast and it doesn't make any sense. So we would have to decrease the depth here. So this little bit, it's just creating a little bit movement inside our wave, and therefore a little bit of interest and realness. So if you're saying, oh, I don't like this kind of weird modulation here, you can just right click your knob, and then you have a couple of drop down menus here. So you can just bypass this modulator LFO1, or you can remove it, or you can remove all modulators, which would mean if we have another LFO that is modulating the wavetable position, we could right click and remove all modulators very easily. But I liked a little bit of modulation here. So if you have the feeling, if you're patching, I would recommend just playing around with this, Just have a listen for what makes the sound, what is adding to the sound. It's just making it a little bit nicer, but it's not, making it something completely different and weird. So, weirdness can be cool sometimes, but in this case, that's just a matter of personal taste. If you like this kind of sound, it's also totally fine if you like this kind of modulation. Cool. So a cool way to just, get a feeling of different wavetables is just to click through, you just play a note and click through the different wavetables. This is what I would recommend you to do, to just get a feeling on how some of the sound waves sound like. So metal kind of sounding stuff. Creepy kind of sounding stuff, electric guitar. So like the sound designers or the wavetable designers, they just, analyzed waves and waves over time and different positions of waves and implemented them here. So the names, you can just read the name and kind of guess that it will be related to a guitar sound in some way. This is not really sounding like a guitar because there are a lot of settings missing that would make it sound like a guitar, because wavetable is not the only thing that's important, but the core sound would be like the core sound of an electric guitar. Alright, so now that we've dialed in a wavetable here, because the first one we've had, it was this, I don't know, it's just this init setting thing. I don't know how to even get back to that here. So now we've deleted our wavetable position, and now let's check out those two buttons in the top right corner here. So now every time you play your note, it will just start from a random point here. And you, by randomness, you can choose the area in which it will, you know, choose the waveform to start from. And if you put this to 0, it's very interesting. It's, you know, it's not that washed out anymore. Like this is super stereo because it's also always picking random phase, and through this random phase, it's creating the stereo effect. If you compare it to this, it's a lot, you know, the attack pops out a lot more. Like this, there's no real attack. And like this, you can just choose from where this initial sound wave starts from. It's not making that of a big difference, actually. I don't really hear any difference here. So those are those knobs. Like in real life, you really wouldn't use those knobs too much. I haven't been using them a lot in my patching processes, and I've scrolled through 100 different presets. No one is really using them. I think the only use case for me that I've found out is this random phase knob, and you can just make the sound a little bit clearer with this attack thing in the middle. So that's just the basic explanation of our first oscillator. So I just wanted to show you some of the cooler wavetables here. This category is called analog. This means it's, you know, like kind of sampled from analog gear. So an analog bass drum or whatever that means, bass sine wave. It's not perfect, as you can see. It's not a perfect sine. So let's decrease the unison so we have a very clean sound. You know, it's slightly moving. So if you don't want to have a perfect sound, you can just put one of your LFOs here. Maybe put it to it. I think slower rates make sense here. Now the sound, you know, it's not really changing. It's not even changing the pitch in the wavetable position. It's changing pitch because we applied the fine-tuning LFO. But it's just creating like the overtone spectrum of the sine wave. Just changes slightly, and this makes the sound a little bit more complex. So analog bass drum sine wave is a pretty good starting point, especially if you want to create sub-basses. So sub-basses, like in general, this is something I've got from a guy. Whoa, what was his name again? He has a nice YouTube channel. Hit me up if you want to have this information. I cannot remember the name right now. He's doing this Michael Jackson production, like tutorials or walkthroughs, like how he made Billie Jean's bassline and all this stuff. It's pretty cool. Check it out. I think if you just type in Michael Jackson bassline stuff, you will find out. But he recommended for basses, like you will find the strongest fundamental in sine waves and square waves. So this is something we can later explore, but so like a if you just have a listen to the lowest frequency here, I mean there is just barely one frequency here, but it's very strong, it's very solid. So if you go to, like, for example, if we go to basic shapes, this is a wavetable where just all the basic shapes are located in. So let's right click and remove this modulator from our wavetable position. So we have our sine wave here. So this is a saw wave. This is called a saw wave because it looks like a saw. So this is basically, this is a saw, but this is also a saw. But you have to see this like from, it's just starting at this point and it's going up there. Or if you have it flipped around, it's, you know, it's the same thing. So a saw wave basically has not that much strong low end as a sine wave has, but it has a lot of nice other overtone material. It's what we will use a lot in this tutorial. So this is a triangle wave. It's somewhat between a sine wave and a saw wave. You can hear there's a little bit of a... It looks like if you distort a sine wave. This is a square wave, and a square wave is pretty similar to in the bass region, as a square wave is pretty similar to a sine wave. So you either use for sub bass a sine wave or a square wave, or not even only for sub basses, but also for, sub oscillation, which is up here in the left corner. It's our sub oscillator, our third oscillator, so oscillator A, oscillator B, and our sub oscillator. So this is interesting. Yeah, so a rectangle wave is just basically a square wave starting from a different phasing point. And it's getting thinner the more, the point of zero, the 0 point gets toward the edge, it gets a little bit thinner. Like here it's thinner. And this already, I don't know what this wave is called, but this is getting into the direction of like the weirder waves. So the more, rise and fall and the weirder the shape will get, the more different overtone spectrums it will have, the more, grittiness information you will have to filter out later on, because this is the part of the synth where it's subtractive, So now we're still just talking about our basic ingredients. So we're kind of talking about the kind of pasta we want to cook, long pasta, short pasta, and all, the cooking style and the sauce and everything will be added later on. So yeah, I think this gives you a pretty good overview over those basic shapes and also those spectral shapes. We can maybe have a look at those shapes here. So if you have a listen to those and just listen closely to the overtone spectrum. What is the overtone spectrum? It's just the high frequencies coming through. It's creating this song. It's like if you do it with your mouth, like very thin, but very a little bit annoying, like a mosquito or something. This is like more like a shaver or something. So that's how those different waveforms sound. I don't want to explain we will not explore all of the different wavetables here, because there are like literally 100 or something. And you can even build your own if you really want to dive deep into this kind of Serum super deep production stuff. There are tons of YouTube tutorials out there, but this is not that important for the sake of, sound designing melodic techno leads. So this is why we will continue now to our next section. Alright, so now we've explored oscillators. So, we have oscillator A, and oscillator A is just doubled and then it's called oscillator B. So everything that we've just talked about in oscillator A also applies to oscillator B. So now we've chosen our pasta, and, like as core ingredients, we can add a little bit more. So there are 2 more sound creating ingredients right here. And it is the third one. So we have oscillator A, oscillator B that are really creating sound. And then we have our sub oscillator. So for example, we just go in our oscillator A to analog, just go to basic shapes, and we just choose this saw wave right here. Alright, now we can choose to add a sub oscillator to this oscillator. Sub should mean theoretically that it's below something. I mean, here you can also turn it higher, but that's just cool. So now we will just turn this down. So now we can add a deeper layer to our sound, and we can, add a fundament to our sound. And this is pretty, this is already like kind of a core principle. So if you're lacking, if you're missing out like richness and deepness and fatness to your sound, it could be because, you don't have any lows inside your sound. So just by adding a sub oscillator, it can really make the sound a lot thicker. So here you can just basically scroll through all of those different waveforms. Those are the basic waveforms here again. But as a sub, if you use it as a sub oscillator, I would recommend you just using like sine wave style subs, or this kind of rectangle, a square wave rectangle kind of waves. Great. So let's continue and explore our noise oscillator. I mean, it's not really an oscillator, it's more of a sample-based sound engine. So you can click here and go to analog, and there are different kind of noises in here. So this is just how noise sounds. It's like white noise, pink noise, brown noise, blue noise. They're all kind of different noises. Some of them have more high frequencies, some of them have more low frequencies. So bright white is the one that we will work with for most of the time. And yeah, so this is not pitch dependent, so it doesn't matter if I play like a higher note. It will sound exactly the same, which is good because noise is not musical by itself, so you don't hear any pitch here. If I would like try to sing a pitch that I'm hearing, it's impossible. It just sounds like so you can change this by enabling this keyboard here. So now the lower the note is, the lower the sound will sound. I mean, with white noise, as I said, it's not really making sense, but there are sounds in here that you can choose different stuff, and you can even like buy upgrades here and stuff like that. So people implement like different kind of wavetables in here, but this is not something we will use and not something we really need. Bright white is the one that we will use a lot in this tutorial, in this course, but feel free to just explore the different sections down here. Alright, so now we've kind of, went over the concrete sound making oscillators and sound engines. So now I want to continue and explain like how a subtractive synth, or in this case it's a subtractive wavetable synth, or as we call it in German, eine eierlegende Wollmilchsau, which means too hard to explain, but just a synth that can do a lot of things here. So I want to explain like the synth workflow to you now, and like the signal routing inside the synthesizer, so you'd get a feeling for how the signal flows from one point to another, because you really have to see it like a stream of water. You have just your wave, and it's just getting oscillated, and it's getting a little bit modulated by our fine-tune LFO down here from the beginning, but then it's going straight into our ears, and now we can do a lot more. So let's explore the next section, which is our filters section. Okay, so welcome to the next section. This is, so now we're going to have a look at our filter. What does filter mean? Filtering is just filtering something out. So you have, I don't know, a lot of pasta and with the water, and you just put it inside your sink, and then you have this net, and then you filter out all the water, and what you get is your cooked pasta. So this is kind of what... is kind of a good analogy for what your filter is doing. So if you enable your filter, now it gets highlighted blue here. You can hear that a lot of meat gets... so we lose a lot of high-end information if we enable the filter. So basically on the left side is your low-end information, and on the right side is your high-end information. So if you have like a look at a EQ is nothing different than a filter. You see? There's all this high-end information, and if we enable the filter and the cutoff frequency is just this is one of the most important knobs in whole subtractive synthesizer history. So focus on this knob. So this cutoff knob is basically telling you where the frequency starts to get cut off. So that's the cutoff frequency. So now there's no frequency that's getting cut off, but if we decrease the number or turn the knob to the left, you can also visually see it down here. Our overtone spectrum that is right here gets quieter, and at a certain point it's just fully filtered out. So how can we use this mechanism to our benefit? That's the next question, and we are going to go over that very soon, but let's just explore a little bit the other settings right here, and then we will take care of how we can actually use filters to make pretty nice stuff. Great, so this on the left side just means that our oscillator A, that's why the A is displayed here, is just going inside this filter. So pasta is not going directly to the table, it's just going into the net before it's going to the table. If we had a second oscillator, we would have to enable oscillator B, so that also this oscillator in this way, therefore this waveform is flowing inside our filter and it's getting cut off at a certain cutoff frequency. N means noise, so if we have noise, we can put this noise inside our filter and filter all of our sound engines, so S is sub, through our filter. This keyboard knob down here means that the higher up you are, the more open the filter will be. This is interesting. If you have like patches that range over a broad spectrum, this can be interesting, but it's also something that I don't use too often. All right, so let's take care of those parameters right here. Panning, very obvious. It's just panning the whole signal to the left or to the right. Mix means just that all the signals that are getting inside the filter are 100% mixed with the filter, so they are being affected. Like this, you can see this as like, yeah, level of the filter. Oh no. So, okay, so mix means that So mix basically means that if this is turned completely to the right, the filter will affect those signals coming in for 100%, and the more you dial it to the left, the less the filter will affect the signal, which will result in less cutoff of the frequencies. You know, so there the filter is now enabled, but it's not mixed in, so it's not working. This is something I never used, so forget about it. Fatness and drive just means, you know, different filters, filter modules, they are built so they create overtones if you add drive. So this just makes drive is similar to distortion in a little bit more subtle way, and fatness, I think that's just creating kind of, you know, this is just boosting the level of the signal that is before the cutoff frequency. So this makes the signal fatter, which means louder. Yeah, you just have to watch your levels a little bit. So the more drive you give, the more you have to turn back your master volume, which is up in the right corner here. And now you can really hear the distortion. So drive can be interesting in value, like in a value from like 0 to 20% or something. Okay, so the last knob we have to have a look at is the filter resonance. Filter resonance just means there's this little bump that is being created here right in front of our cutoff frequency. So if you now scroll through your signal, you have this like a kind of nasal kind of feel like. So this is like, for example, how you could make a riser. So if you just turn off oscillator B and A, now you have just the noise. It's sounding like it's pitched, but it's really, white noise is an accumulation of all frequencies mixed evenly together. So you're emphasizing a certain frequency with the resonance here. So have a look here, down here. So this pitch right here, it equals the resonance, so this is what it's kind of pretending to be a pitch, but it's not really a pitch, it's just emphasizing this region where there can be pitches a little bit more. I hope that was clear. It's a little bit hard to explain sometimes. Resonance is really important in, like, for example, acid kind of music, like, you know, with those TB-303 acid bass lines, they had a very distinct resonance that's not really so easy to be rebuilt by synthesizing. And I think, as far as I know, Serum is not that good in recreating those acid sounds. If you have any different opinions, or you can really achieve a nice acid sound, please let us know, and maybe we can correct this. So resonance, I use it sparingly, up to 22%. It can add a little bit character character later on. Alright, so that was the first part of the filter frequency. So that was the first part of the filter. Now let's check out this drop-down menu here. So you have kind of a lot of different filters that you can choose. So MG means Moog, which is this, old school synthesizers from Robert Moog, legendary synthesizer builder. Check him out. You have this low pass filter, so low means low pass, so all the low frequency passes through the filter and just the high frequency gets cut off at this point. You can choose different steepnesses here, so let's just enable oscillator A. So you see, if you don't have any oscillator enabled, this will also gray out and will not work. So if you have oscillator A, that's now going into this filter, you can choose a steeper, and now you see this is changing, and the number is just 6 dB per octave. So this is 6 dB per octave that is getting cut off, 12 dB, 18 dB, 24 dB. What this is exactly doing and why we can choose the different steepness levels, this is something that I will explain to you later on. So low passing is this is being used a lot more than the other kind of filters we have here, but we have also like normal, regular low pass filters. I think those affect the drive and fatness settings right here. Then we have a high pass, so this is just flipping the filter around, and you can, you just have the high frequencies and filtering out the low ones, and this is exactly the same thing with your filter steepness. Then you have a bandpass filter, so this is just, so now you have the middle frequencies coming through more, and you can create this kind of sweepy sounds with it. So feel free just to experiment with those. And then you have more like super experimental filters, and those seem like they do nothing, but if you crank up the resonance, you can create like super like comp filtering. This is called comp filter. I'm really not a huge expert of this kind of filtering, so if you want to have a fundamental knowledge about comp filtering and flange filtering and other kind of filters, feel free just to check it out somewhere on the internet. I'm so sure that people really have gotten really nerdy about this stuff, but my expertise is not really in this part, so this is why we are going to focus on just our more normal filtering modes, like the low pass, Moog low pass filter. Alright, so that's it for the filter module. So if now we are having a look at our different ingredients all separately. So now we're watching the table and we have our pasta that it's cooked, and we have our tomatoes, and we have our zucchini, and we have all our different ingredients. And in the next steps, after we've watched a couple of other modules, we will put them together, and then they will create interplay, and this interplay will get really, really interesting. So see you in the next chapter. Okay, so welcome to the next section. This section is called envelopes. So what is an envelope? An envelope is just basically similar to an LFO, but it's not repeating all the time. So you have a certain shape, and you can use this shape to modulate different parameters of your synth. The level of your synth, filter opening of your synth, and all parameters basically that are here inside your synth. So now envelope 1 is always mapped to your level of oscillator A and oscillator B. So if I press a note, it will stay up the whole time because I have the sustain enabled. So there are inside your envelope, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different phases. So you have your attack phase. This just means if you increase this phase, the sound will take a certain amount of time, in this case 1.26 seconds, to reach its highest value. And because it's already mapped, and you cannot see this here, but it is mapped to the volume of your oscillators, this will mean that the sound appears in a time of 1.2 seconds. So this is like the mosquito which is coming from here. It's just flying. Yeah. The next phase that is coming is the hold phase. So this is turned to 0 by default, and it's something now it opens up here. So if you say, I want my sound to take 1.26 seconds to reach its highest level, and then I want the sound to be hold for 1 second, then hold will be the right knob for you to use. I've never ever used hold in my whole life. So yeah, if you have a nice use case for this knob, please tell me. I haven't found one yet, but now it gets interesting. So pads, for example, so sounds that have to evolve over time and do this slowly, they need to have a longer attack time, because this is just smoothing out the sound, you know? It's like a completely different feel too. This is like striking a guitar, and the other thing would be like more like a violin kind of a sound, or like a crescendo or something. So it's a lot slower. And as with the LFOs here, you can use this knob that is always between the points to choose whether it's exponential or logarithmically increasing. So that's the attack time and the hold time. So now we have two values that are sometimes a little bit hard to understand. So, you know, you can see attack is in milliseconds, hold is in milliseconds, decay is in milliseconds, release is in milliseconds, and sustain is in dB. What does it mean? So all those four different knobs here, which are marked with milliseconds, they are time-based knobs. And the sustain is not a time-based knob, it's a knob that's based on dB. So what does it mean? Sustain is just I will press a note and it will sustain at this level as long as I press a note. I cannot tell him how long to sustain, it's just sustaining as long as I press the note. And it's doing this on the level of 0 dB. So if I decrease this value, you can see first we have our attack time, super short, so we cannot see it. We have no hold, and then we have our decay time, and then we have the sustain time. So this is kind of the point where the sustain is just standing right in front of the cliff, kind of. So the sustain and decay, they kind of go together with each other, because you cannot really hear the decay with the sustain turned up. So if you don't want a sound that's hold for a long time, and sounds that have to be hold for a long time are pads, are longer sounds like longer lead sounds, background, risers, and all this kind of stuff. If you have those sounds, I would recommend you to leave sustain at 0 or something at a point where it's just audible. No, somewhere between minus, don't know, 30 and minus 4 dB or 0 dB. But if you want to make your sound super clicky and super short, turn off the sustain all the time. And now the decay time really can work. Now I press the button and I'm still on it, but it's not sustaining anymore because it's at minus infinite dB. Cool, so now the decay time can really work, and now we can play around with the decay. Make it really short. And if this is too short for you, you can zoom in here by just dragging up and down here. And release time basically means if you release the note, it will continue for a certain amount of milliseconds. So if I have 0 release, it will just stop right after I go off the key or off whatever, you know, MIDI information, whatever is giving MIDI information into your DAW. So release time is basically used to make a sound more natural, because if you're like plucking guitar or any real instrument, it will not disappear like this. It's just completely unhuman, and like sounds in general, they don't just, you know, appear and then suddenly disappear to a value of minus infinite. So release time just makes your sound more flowy. You can also hear this, so I will just increase that release time over time. I can make it super long, so now it's just like, now I can take off my hands, play a lot of notes, and they will clash with each other because all of the different notes have a very long release time. So if you're playing like this, if you're playing very, very short notes like arpeggios or something, it makes sense to shorten the release to an amount where it's not clashing so hard. Because like if you have it too long, you have intervals that sound very dissonant, and this wouldn't work out. So this is what the release time is for. Yeah, so that's basically it about the envelopes. We have 3 envelopes right here, and as I told you, envelope 1 is always mapped to our oscillator A and oscillator B volume. So let's explore the other ingredients here, and then we will continue and combine them and see how they interplay with each other. Cool, so we've talked about envelopes, we've also talked about LFOs. So let's have a look at those two parameters right here. So velo means velocity. So if you're hitting your key a little bit softer, you can choose the softness to affect a certain value. So if you want to hit your key soft, and because you hit it soft, it shouldn't be that loud, you can take the velocity and map it to your level of your oscillator. And now you have to go to the left and increase the velocity. So now the velocity affects this level in this range. So now I hit the key very soft, and now it's very quiet. And if I hit it stronger, it will be louder. And if I want to make this kind of span broader and wider, so I want to have more differences between quiet and loud, I have to increase the area it's working in. So now very quiet, now very loud. So this is how you can create dynamics. So I would think about like velocity very technically. So now you have just something that's very high, and you have something that's very low. And this is just giving out a value like between, 0 and 100, or I don't know how they programmed it, but you're just using this. You can say, okay, if I hit it hard, something will be higher, and if I hit it soft, something will be lower. And this is something we can use to, just create variation inside our patches. So let's just right click and remove all modulators, put this to 100% again. So note is kind of the same thing. The higher you press, the higher the value will be. The lower you press, the lower the value will be. So for example, if you put this to your filter, because low frequencies naturally, because it's a low pass filter, will come through your low pass filter. Sorry, let's decrease the resonance here. So if I had a very low note, you will hear it. And now because we've put our note modulator onto our cutoff, do you see the small blue point here? That's what the difference is making. It's now here, and before on our low register it was here. So now through this note modulator we can be sure that also the high notes will be audible and not completely be cut away from our sound. And if I go lower, and I will just sweep down here, just watch this blue kind of point. Okay, so this is like the interplay between velocity and note, and you can play around with if it should be affected exponentially or not. By again just clicking those little knots between your points. You can also right click here and remove all destinations, so you can either go to the knob that's being controlled or to the controller that's controlling the knob and just delete it there. Cool, so now we've already talked about interplay a little bit between the velocity and our level, and between the note height or the note value and our filter cutoff opening. So let's create more interplay, and now it will really get interesting. Alright, so here we are creating more interplay now. The most common interplay is between envelopes and level, and envelopes and filter opening. So what we will nearly do in every patch here is we will choose a envelope and put it onto our filter cutoff. So I would separate between envelope 1, which is generally more used also in Common Sense and synthesizer programming. Oftentimes envelope 1 is used for the amplitude and envelope 2 is used for filters. So if you have if you're checking out some kind of synth, except if you're in crazy modular stuff, you can be sure that that's the case. So envelope 1 is already controlling our level. So with envelope 1 and our level, we just basically define, do we want a short or a long sound? Do we want a sound that stays there if we stay on the note, or do we want a sound that goes away even though we stay on the note? Do we want the sound to be there when we release the note? Sorry, I'll just open the filter a little bit more. Or do we want to, want the sound to disappear right after we leave the note? So that's what we already had. So let's go to envelope 2, and as we did before, we just drag this value over here, close down the filter because otherwise it won't make so much difference. And now we will completely turn down the sustain and turn down the decay time. So you can see the other envelope here, it's grayed out, and now already also the second one. So that's interesting. So now our filter will open up over time, and the time is defined by this values down here. So have a listen. Now you hear like how it's ending, it's like boop, boop, boop. So we have to increase the release time here. Already more flowy. And this is really, you have to pay attention to the details here. Like in generally in synth production, details are super important. Now it gets natural. So this, of course, those two values, they, you know, the two envelopes, they have a lot in common, you know, because if your sound is not long enough, your second envelope cannot work because the sound will be away before it even is, you know, after 1000 milliseconds, this one is already not there anymore. So if we increase the release time here, so now we're starting to get this kind of plucky feel. So this plucky feel, you can visually see here how this is opening in the shape of this envelope here. So if I increase, for example, the attack time of our second envelope, it will make this vroom, 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 more softer feel. Just a little bit to make the attack time a little bit more fluffy. And the intensity and the setting of the cutoff knob and the, you know, the filter steepness, this all makes a very big difference. So this is what we're going to explore now, like further synth filtering explorations. Okay, so have a listen to how the sound behaves if I change the filter steepness. Here you can here it's super obvious, like if we change between 6 dB and 24. If you have a higher filter slope, your sound will get more plucky, it will get more movement inside it. So now this is something I cannot describe it any other than movement or pluckiness. I think that those are the best words for it, but you have to get a feeling for how, you know, how close it is. And now what's also very important is the setting of this cutoff here and the intensity in which it opens up, so how much it opens up. So here it opens up until the maximum. So it's opened up very much. So if you close this gradually, you can make the sound more mellow. You know, now it's more mystical and it's not that aggressive. This creates tension. And of course, this also has a lot of interplay with our resonance. So this like housey, classy housey steps, they oftentimes have a lot of resonance. So you can add a little bit of resonance. This adds up to the sound pretty nicely. So this is something that we will, when we will create this really fat and big patches, this is something we will have a certain look at, you know, how exactly where this position of the cutoff knob itself, where the cutoff starts, you know, and the intensity of the opening is. So this will be very, very, very important, and this is also very important to use. So if you hear something that's super aggressive and super wide open, if you hear something from a producer that you like and you want to recreate it, you can guess, okay, so the filter has to be opened. Otherwise it wouldn't sound like that. Cool. So that was like the very basic exploration of, you know, envelopes together with filters. Of course, we can use this envelope and put it on a resonance. And this is kind of, you know, how those TB303 kind of sounds come together. And you really have to find a sweep spot. I'll just make it a little bit louder. Get this gong, 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 gong. With resonance, the problem is that you also lose a lot of low end information. So if you have a listen to the low end, now it's there. Let's go an octave lower. Now the fundamental frequency will get through more, and you can even visually see it here. There, it's just that the lower note information gets squashed down a little bit. Cool. So I will just remove this oscillator. We're not using and not this one. So this is just how you can use envelopes within your filters. Of course, you can use them to also create drive. Yeah, this is just basically making more distorted and louder. That's why it's sounding good. So we're really not using this one here. All right, so I guess we've explored like envelopes and filter and the interplay of envelopes and filter enough to heading on to the next section, which is the FX section here. But I would really recommend you check out your envelopes, check them out on all kind of different parameters, just play around with them. Here's one more trick that I found out, which is if you use envelope 1 and map it to the level once more, and even do this on your oscillator, turn it back, put the envelope up, put this level down, you can create more shorter and more tighter sounds. I'll just, let's just right click and bypass them. So I have to put them up. It's just a little bit shorter. So that's because the envelope 1 is applied to the same value, which is the level or the volume of our oscillator 1, and noise 2 times. So it's like 2 times 2. It's just shorter and tighter. So this is something that you can use for your advantage to shorten up and make the sound really concrete. Okay, so before we head to the FX section, let's check out if we increase the decay time of our envelope 1 a lot, it will sound like this. Just a very long sound with a lot of noise. Now you can hear that the notes there are overlapping, creating a fifth in this case. So if you want to have a long release time, which is great to play because it feels supernatural, but you don't want the notes to overlap, what do? It's very easy. You go to your voicing settings here and you just put your voicing to mono. This is not affecting your unison or mono in case of, stereo field or something. This is just saying just one note at a time can be played. So we can increase our unison to make our sound more stereo. And now we can, use our release time but still play fast melodies, and the release times are not clashing with each other. I'll turn it off again, and we can just decrease the level of our noise here a little bit. It's cleaner. The other thing, it also can be a nice effect. So don't get me wrong, everything I tell you here, it's not good or bad, okay? So you can use a lot of things that I say are weird, or you wouldn't use them in this moment, you can use them in another moment. So please don't get into this black and white thinking of this is good and this is bad. In certain circumstances, things are good and things are bad. Okay, so let's stop with this philosophical talking and let's continue to our FX section, which is up here. So this opens up a whole new dimension, and the first effect is even called hyperdimension. So we'll just reduce our unison here. We'll just deactivate our noise because we don't really need it at the moment, just to have a more plain waveform. And let's hear the sound, and we'll just go through our different effects here, and let's have a listen to what they do. Very mono, but also very strong. I'll just decrease the master volume here. And this hyperdimension, it's basically kind of a mixture between a chorus and all this kind of spatial effects. Haas effect. So this is just spreading it over the stereo field. Just to add a little bit. This is kind of like a super small delay. You can even hear, kind of hear it doubling. So this can be interesting if you wanna, make your sounds wider and fuller regarding the stereo field. I'm actually not using this effect so much, but we will use it on this on a couple of patches. What's interesting about, the Serum effects, they have presets here, not that many, but yeah, you can just click this little drop-down menu. I guess if you have different Serum versions, maybe you have more than me, so you can just choose a preset here. Okay, so let's continue with our next effect, which is called distortion. So now, the signal is flowing from our oscillator A into our filter, which is currently disabled. So it's just going directly into our FX section, and here it's flowing from the top down. So it's going into our hyperdimension, then it's going into our distortion, only of course if they're enabled. If they're not enabled, it's not flowing through it, and then it's going through our distortion here. So distortion is everybody knows distortion is just a guitar that you put in an amp and it's just really starts screaming. So distortion is squeezing a sound super hard, like a compressor, and it's creating, because it's squeezing it that hard, technically there are overtones that are being generated, odd and even overtones, depending on the style of distortion you choose. So if you add drive, it will always make your signal louder. I don't know why they didn't implement it like an output gain control here, so you have to control your gain in your master, because so if I add drive here, so if you add that much drive, you see it's getting squashed so hard that the attack time really is not there anymore. Ding. Like this, it's a lot louder, and it's like more like a sustained note, so it's really just squashing the note. There are a lot of different kind of distortion types here. We will have a look at those distortion types when we will patching. They are important, but it's not necessary to have a look at them now. Alright, so you can either turn the effect on or off here or here. So this is like kind of loading it in, and this is just kind of bypassing it. What's interesting is you can just drag and drop here on the left side, so you can put the hyperdimension over the distortion or the distortion. So you can just change the order here on the left side. Okay, so let's check out flanger. So flanger is just emphasizing certain, you can also see this down here, certain points in the overtone spectrum within a certain rate and within a certain intensity, which is the feedback. So now you can really see it also here. There are just here, there's like a small bump wandering around here. And of course you can hear it super extreme. It's like creating a second different kind of harmonic layer over your actual wave. It's an effect that, we can use, but we won't use it that much in our synth lead production here. Phaser, flanger, chorus, they're all kind of spatial effects. So they're making your sound wider, more complex, but they're not changing like the core of your sound that much. They're not doing too much in time. They're not like a delay or reverb, which is really adding a tail or something. They're just, sweeping around your original signal. I would call it like kind of like if you imagine like particles around something. You have like I don't know, if you're playing like online games, you have like your buff or something, and then there's like a lot of particles flowing around your head and all that stuff. So this is kind of how I would like imagine or visualize this kind of effect. So just play around and click around between phaser and flanger. So they are all related to each other. So this is how flanger, we just had the flanger here. Let's have a listen to phaser. So this kind of creating this O, A, E, I, O, U settings, which is also just emphasizing different frequencies over time. You can see here it's just sweeping through the actual signal. This is like kind of, what we had here before, like this flanges. That's kind of similar. Now it's super fast because the envelope is controlling it. But yeah, so this is kind of where inside your synthesizer different effects and sections are related with each other. Chorus, just doubling your signal and panning inside your stereo field. This is pretty cool. It just makes the sound fuller and adding a little bit to the stereo field. Can be so long that you really can hear it. Pretty nice. You can use this, to just disappear without complexity, I would say. So if you add this kind of super low rate chorus with a lot of feedback, it will add this room in the very back of your sound. And this will create, it will sound more high fidelity. This is just a little bit boring. It's just creating complexity and room, and the room is disappearing in a very smooth way, and it's just making it sound more natural and more high quality. So a chorus is basically also related with a delays, and it's like a chorus is based on delays, but just in a very, very short time. That's why you can also see the delay times here. It's not going above 20 milliseconds. So delay, I don't really have to explain this to you. It's just delaying the signals in a certain time division. So now it's quarter notes. You can change them just by dragging those notes up and down here. So now the left side is being delayed by an eighth note and the right side by a quarter, and so on. You can increase the feedback here. So now it's, just going on forever. And what we will try later on with our patches is to make them appear and disappear in a very smooth way. So we can use, the chorus kind of setting that we've just implemented to push it to the back, and then we will have the delay, which is even delaying it out furthermore. And on this delay we can apply a filter. And we can say the first delay should be on the left side and then the second one on the right side. That's called ping pong. It will make the delay more obvious though. Ring, 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 but also more stereo. So now there's still some information in the back, which is pretty cool. And if we're talking about spatial reverbs and delays, of course we have to talk about reverbs. And the reverbs in their engines, they're built like delays, just 1,000 or 100, I don't know how many different super small delays. And so we're using different kind of delayizations, which end up in reverberizations to make the sound disappear in a super smooth and complex way, and this will make it super nice. So if we enabled a reverb, let's just turn off the other effects. Let's increase the mix. You can, the decay time is just telling you how long the reverb will be. Super huge. You can low cut it, you can cut out the lows, cut out the highs. So if you go to the right, it will cut out more highs. If you go to the right on the low cut, it will cut out more lows. So that's the logic behind those two knobs here. Spin and depth, I think it's something like the pitch of the reverb is getting modulated. Yes. So this is like kind of adding vibrato to the reverb. I'm not really using this too much. So I think most important one is the decay time. Then you have like your low cut, high cut kind of stuff, because if you have too much low information in the reverb, it will muddy up your signal, even if it's a super loud signal. And size, it's just kind of, it's hard to explain. It's just the room size in the end. Okay, and then you can choose between a hall and a plate, and you see some of the values are changing right here. So now it's super mono. Takes a pretty long time. That's a pre-delay. They have a very distinguished sound to themselves. There are pretty cool videos on YouTube that really separate between those sounds. I'm really always using Hall with a mediocre decay time, regular size, but you can also like choose some of the presets here. When I'm using reverbs, I'm just gearing towards, if you know, they're super obvious. So either you have a very long reverb, so it's adding space, like it's a separate effect. You kind of add a tail to a sound, or you add reverb just to make it a little bit wider and just to smooth it out a little bit. So this is kind of the two use cases in between we are using reverbs. Alright, so let's continue to the compressor here. Compressor is like every other compressor too. I won't go too deep into compressor settings right here. You have a certain threshold that you can pull down by pulling the threshold like to the right side here. And then you can choose the attack time, release time, and the makeup gain. But what's really interesting about this compressor is the multiband function. So have a listen. This is really squeezing the whole signal, and if we put on our with the multiband compression. Squeezing out the highs and all the details of the spatial effects we've dialed in before. So a multiband compressor will basically make your signal super upfront. You know, it's like if you have this, it will make it like this. So it will pull out all the information that was way in the back and will even it out with the information that was there in the front already. That's very interesting and a very nice thing, and I would definitely recommend you to use it. Maybe it's a little bit too hard like right now, so you can just dial back the mix. So it's just doing a little bit. Then we can use our EQ and just boost the highs of our signal, for example. Cut away our lows. And then we have a filter in the very end that we can then use and could eventually modulate, but I've never been using this filter in the end. So now this is like a broad overview over your different effects here. I would just recommend play with them and then try to, you know, change the order of those things and see how they relate and how they affect each other. That's very, very interesting. And this is something we're going to do a lot in our like patching process later on. So this was a small overview over our effect sections here, and when we are talking about effects, we can directly start to explore our mod section right here on the left side. And something you can do, for example, is like this is just one knob. It's called a macro. Like in general in music, macros are knobs that you can use to, like, this is one knob that is then controlling a lot of other knobs, so you don't like physically you cannot like turn 4 knobs at the same time. So now you can, you know, use this macro and you can put it on the mix of the delay, for example. You can put it on the mix of the reverb. So using one knob, and you have to pull the mix knob to the left. So if this is to the left, turn to the left, the reverb is off and the delay is off. And if it turns to the right, it ends where the blue line ends. And you can put this on the chorus as well. Yeah, so now we can call this like space. And now if you have a listen. Now you can, something can come from the back. Comes to the front, and this is something we can then automate in Ableton. You can just press this drop down menu here and you hit configure and you just hit whatever button you want to automate, and like over time you could take this knob and just make your whole signal disappear out of nowhere. That's pretty interesting. So now we have a couple of effects going on. I've explained the mod section. Envelopes are clear, LFOs are clear, velocity and note is clear, voicing is clear, and then we have a section that is interesting, which is down here on the right side. This is just portamento, or also known as glide. So if you have a note and you press your second note, the pitch will directly go up there and will be perfect in tune. So playing a C, now playing an E flat, there will be no pitching modulation between those notes. But if you hit portamento, and you see there is this time window popping up. If you hit it, it will, if you play legato, legato means you hit one note and then while pressing this note you hit the other note, it will create this glide. Gong, gong. So if you don't want to play it like this, so now it requires your playstyle to be enabled, you just hit always. So now it doesn't matter which note you press, it will always glide. And now you have to choose a portamento time, a glide time that makes sense, also in a musical context later on. If you hit scaled, you can also read it here, then it's scaling the portamento based on the note distance. Larger distance between notes will result in higher glide values. So if you're jumping from down here from a very low octave to a very high octave, it will take longer than if you have like two notes that are very close to each other. No glide here. So this can be an interesting thing to play around if you are playing melodic material that is either close to each other and you want it to glide or not want it to glide, or you play melodic material that's super far from each other. Alright, so the last thing down here is our keyboard. You can also click here and play notes, and you have your pitch bend on the left side. This will be especially interesting for melodic techno leads later on. And so pitch bend is basically on every normal keyboard you have a pitch bend and a mod wheel here. Pitch bend is like the mechanics there, so it flips back into the middle, and this is made for pitch modulation. That's why it's called pitch bend. And the mod wheel is just, you can assign basically every parameter. And if you have a look at your Serum, you can see in the left corner that it's moving when I move here. So if this is not happening to you, something in your MIDI settings is wrong. So if I play a note and I just squeeze the pitch wheel here, dun, 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 it makes this subtle pitch variation, which makes the sound very interesting. And the range in which it's functioning, that's what you can choose here. So you can choose, if you go to the highest point with your pitch bend wheel, it will go up. Hey there, welcome to the second part, the sound design for melodic techno sounds, leads, basses, arps. I'm super hyped about this one because the sound design in melodic techno, it's just super, super nice. And if you do it right, you can really, achieve super fat and big sounds and leads. So we are going to explore inside Serum again, inside my DAW of choice Ableton Live. We're going to explore the deepness and especially the interplay of all the different parameters. Alright, so without further of talking, let's start with our first sound, which will be a bass sound. So this super classy 16th bass pattern that so many of those tracks have in common. So we are going to explore how to sound design this kind of bass. Alright, so let's start. I've loaded up an instance of Serum right here. By default it is as we've explored in our previous video, it's just a plain saw wave. Just for your information, there is on my master, there's this utility which is making -12 dB of gain reduction, because it's just some recording settings to be safe that I'm not clipping anywhere in my recording audio process here. But there is this kick. You can download this kick as well in the download section. It's just a kick that I've made with the plugin called Bassism and a little bit of clipping afterwards. So if you're interested in how to make this kind of kick sound design, you can just leave us a mail and contact us, and maybe we can do a video. Alright, so I will just call this one baseline 16th. So yeah, in this sound design part of the course, we're not going to go too deep into melody writing. We are going to explore just the sound design part here. I mean, with the 16th bass hands, it's super easy. You just create a MIDI clip. Let's just deactivate the kick for a moment, and then we will do this all in G minor, because our kick is tuned to G minor, but you can use whatever DAW you want to use. So we're here in our 16th grid, as you can see down here, and just duplicated a couple of 16th notes with all the same velocity, so it's super easy. So let's have a listen to that. So yeah, that's how it sounds like at the moment. So I like to think of patches as, you know, like primary and secondary aspects. This is something I've also made like a Moxa 37 course on Production Music Live, and that's where I also separated the patches between primary and secondary aspects. So what are primary aspects? Primary aspects are the super obvious aspects of a sound. So for a bass sound, it needs to be deep, you know, it has to be in a low register, otherwise it would not be a bass sound. So that's one primary aspect of this patch. So another primary aspect is that this kind of patches are like super groovy. So we have a short envelope, so it's very plucky, you know. It's like if a bass player would play like very fast notes with his or her fingers, and not like a laying bass line or something. So there are, in like this melodic techno productions, you hear this all the time. It's called Reese bass. So the Reese bass is this laying, chorusy kind of a bass line, but this is something we will not do here. We will do this kind of plucky 16th bass line. So how do we achieve this kind of primary aspect pluckiness? We need to play with our envelope 1, and as we learned, envelope 1 is already mapped automatically to our volume. So if I play the note here and we get rid of the sustain, because as you know, you just need the sustain when you really want to have something that's sustained. But if you want to really get deep into this kind of bass sound design, and we will experience that's super important, that we have a very exact decay settings and all this stuff. So we just get rid of the sustain here and reduce the decay time. And you can already hear it gets pluckier. So this is what I mean. So now we're doing a bass sound, and bass sounds usually are in mono, and you don't really want any notes clashing there. So we can set our whole voicing to mono. As I said earlier, this mono does not mean that like the whole sound will be in mono. It just means that it's one voice playing at a time. So every time, because it's very short, you know, the release time may be overlapping, it will restart and it will not overlap, and therefore not create any unwanted phasing or stuff like this in our low end. So let me have a sip of my coffee. Per default, we have enabled our oscillator A here with our saw wave. This saw wave works pretty well, but what's also pretty nice, if you go to basic shapes, there is this sine wave right here. And we can already pitch this down an octave. And now you can switch through the wavetable positions here. Triangle wave. So is the waveform a primary or a secondary aspect? I would say it's a secondary aspect. This just really depends on whether you like the sound of, for example, a saw wave more than you like the sound of a square wave more. This is personal taste. I personally like the sound of a saw wave more than the sound of a square wave. So this is just a style decision, and it's not really so necessary for the bass to be working in the end. Cool. So we have one unison. This is perfectly fine, because if we would go like into more notes, this would mean we kind of lose our low register notes there, because there's so much phasing. So we just want this very stable note right here. Cool. as I told you in the previous part, we can use our envelope 1 and map it to our level once more, because it is per default mapped to our level from our oscillators. Increase the range that this envelope will work on the level here, and now it will get even more plucky. This release is not doing anything, that's fine. So now you hear it's getting pretty unconcrete, so I would recommend, so this is kind of how you find the sweet spot inside your knobs. You want to have something that's separated, so the notes are separated from each other, so you can really sense the groove. Okay, great, so we can even turn this up a little bit more. Great, so this is like our basic saw wave, and now I would, like, my workflow of doing this kind of bass is just to, get the sound where it really sounds kind of something where we want to end, and then we can start and retweak some parameters and see maybe a different waveform is adding something to it, and add a sub oscillator and all this kind of stuff. So let's enable the filter. Oscillator A is enabled here, so it's going directly through our filter, and now we can have a listen. Now it's just cutting away all the highs. Now we'll choose envelope 2 to control the filter cutoff. And now you see the envelope 2 is working in both directions here, so it's bipolar. So we just go to the matrix and set it from bipolar to unipolar. So now it's only opening up the filter in the direction of the highs and not in the direction of the lows. Alright, so envelope 2 will not sound that good now, because we have the sustain fully turned up, and this is something we don't really need. So let's turn down the sustain. And you can already hear the pluckiness gets tighter. Have a listen. Now we'll play with the decay time. Now it gets really tight here. Okay, cool. So let's go here to our little kind of a headphone symbol. And now we can play around with the sweep spot. And play around with the cutoff as well. So here the bass would be like super low. This is kind of a style decision, so if you would like your bass to be that low, that's what you would, choose as a position. But I think for this kind of bass lines, something around here works best. So now we can start to flip through our low pass filter variations. So this means this is a Moog low pass filter, or an emulation of a Moog low pass filter, and 12 just means it's the filter steepness. It's 12 dB per octave. So the higher the number, the more plucky your sound will be. So let's switch through the different Moog ladder filters and hear what it's doing to our pluckiness. Here it's very obvious. A lot of more like high frequencies are coming through. With 24 it's maybe a little bit too plucky, so there's like, I'm listening for the groove in itself, so this is not really complementing to the groove in my opinion. So I would go about a filter steepness of 18 or 12 dB. Alright, so now we are still in a pretty high octave, so let's try to pitch this oscillator A down an octave. And now we have to retweak the filter a little bit, because depending on the height of our note, so the pitch in general on a whole frequency spectrum, filter is cutting away more or less. So now we have to readjust the filter a little bit. So let's just play around with the cutoff and the envelope amount of envelope 2 controlling the filter cutoff opening. We can turn up the master here a little bit. So now we can start adding some drive here in the filter. This will boost especially the low frequencies, and add some fatness here. Maybe change the filter slope again to 12 dB. This is just a matter of taste. Alright, so maybe we can try to go back to envelope 1 and just play with the decay time a little bit. So now you can hear there are a lot more like low frequencies coming through. So this is what I mean by going back and forth between parameters, because they're all intertwined with each other. So depending on the cutoff frequency, how fast it is cutting away the frequency, maybe it's so fast that you need to just, make the whole sound a little bit longer, and so the low end is coming through. Alright, so let's add noise to our sound. So we'll just enable the noise oscillator here, go to our drop-down menu and go to analog and choose bright white. This is just a bright white noise. Normally, white noise is just a evened out volume of all pitches, and this is, in the end, if we hear all pitches at the same volume, it is noise actually. So a bright white is a white noise that is just kind of EQ'd, and you have more highs than lows, which is pretty nice because we don't really want our noise to be clashing with our low end. Great, so now we can choose envelope 1 and put it, let it modulate the level of our noise as well. And now you hear what happens. Noise is going directly out into our headphones, and we can disable this by clicking the noise into the filter button here. So now the noise will not go direct out, even though it's not turned on here, but it is going kind of directly out because it wasn't going through our filter, but now going through our filter, and it's mixing and blending nicely with our oscillator A. So I'll just bypass the noise. So now you can hear it adds a little bit of grippiness. Now we can, just see at which point we want to have the grittiness. Here it starts coming in. So something between 11 o'clock. This would be clearly too much. Something between 11 and 1 o'clock will work out pretty well. So we will go for 11 o'clock here, so it's just a little bit subtle. So now we can see if we want to stack our saw wave with oscillator B and or a sub oscillator. I mean, in general, the more oscillators you have, the louder your sound will be, the fatter it will get. So fatness is basically dependent on loudness, so this kind of term, louder sounds better, and that's actually true, and it's not even bad. So we will talk about loudness a little bit later, but yeah, so loudness will mean it will be fatter, but loudness will also mean we have less headroom in the end. So we will see if we enable a sub oscillator, is it adding to the sound, or maybe it's even clashing and it's making the sound a little bit, unclear. So this is just something you have to watch out for. Alright, so let's enable the sub. Turn down the octave. So now the sub oscillator is not going into our filter, and it's really giving good amount of low end to our sound. And it's interesting, depending on where we start, we have more or less sub low end. So I'm starting the playback now. Listen to the sub bass. It's not so much. Now I will restart it. Now it's more. Why is that? Because here on our oscillator A we have this random phase enabled. So we'll just disable this random phase. Random phase just means this wave, our oscillator A saw wave, will start at a random point, somewhere here in the beginning, or there, or here, or there. And because we've added another subwave, both of course will blend with each other. So this is now basic math. If those two waves, you have kind of your sine wave, and then you have your saw wave, which is kind of another form of a sine wave. And if you have the high points adding up to each other, it will get louder. But if you have the high point and the low point of the two waves over each other, it will, get rid of each other. They will cancel each other out. So we will find a point here. We'll just deactivate the random phase start and start dialing with the phase here. So we will find a point where it's really blending together nicely with our sub. So you can just really listen to the sub here. On the most left part and on the most right part, it will sound the thinnest. Now there's like kind of the whole low end is gone, and as I sweep to the middle point, more low end will come in. Now it's getting fat. Now we can choose like how much the sub we actually want. And I mean, now I didn't really map the envelope 1 to our sub. We can try doing this, but maybe it's even nicer if we let this, if we leave this envelope 1 turned off. So we'll just try it. I think it's nicer if we don't have envelope 1 controlling the level of the sub. Alright, so now sine wave is going directly out because it's not going into our filter here. And we can try by putting it into our filter and see if it's adding to the groove and to the sound or not. Alright, so let's try this. I think it's not making such a big difference, so we'll just let it stay turned off here. Alright, so let's try adding a second wave with our oscillator B, maybe a higher octave up. So if you're missing some, higher mid information in your bass lines, this can help out really well. Yeah, but in general, in this kind of melodic techno lead stuff, there's not so much mid information in this kind of 16th sub basses, so maybe it will be unnecessary, but let's just try it. So now oscillator B is not going into our filter, so we just enable this. And let's choose envelope 1 to again control the level of oscillator B. Turn down oscillator B an octave and add it in. I don't know if it's really adding something nice to the sounds, it's just kind of getting more like a little bit squarey sound sometimes, because also the phase is set to random here, so we can choose to not set the phase to random here. This is in general an important thing in a primary aspect, to not have a random phase, but to have a phase that you really controlled when it's starting. We could add some side information by increasing the unison here. This actually is pretty cool. Maybe a little bit too loud. Alright, perfect. So that's it for our bass sound for the primary aspect setting. So we have a very low plucky sound, which are the primary aspects of the 16th pluck bass sound. We set our voicing to mono. So let's go and have a look at our FX section and see what we can do here. So for basses, it's not really forbidden to have kind of, stereo field information there, but it's, sometimes it can really mess up your phase and your low end. So like hyper and dimension, I wouldn't recommend it on your bass. We can have a listen, but I think it won't really add something nice to our bass line. So it's just getting phasey and not that solid. Alright, so what is very interesting with basses is distortion. So we will enable our distortion here, and I'll just go into our bassline 16th Ableton channel and I'll add a limiter after this. I will do this with the Pro L. You don't need this limiter to do this kind of sound, but I'll just show you what distortion is actually doing with the signal on a transient level. We will just have this limiter because it has this function that we can see the transient in times here very well. So we will see what the distortion does to this. Let's blend in some drive. It's making the signal louder. And now it's fully and completely distorted. So what do I want to show you? Distortion comes when you over compress a signal. So like distortion algorithms are kind of a compressor that's creating overtones while it's just squashing the wave down. So if you have a look at the limiter, you have your true peak up here. So this is your true peak level. It's just at, -2 or something here. And you have your RMS, or your perceived loudness, which is like at -9 dB here. So the difference between the highest transient, the actual transient, and the perceived loudness is called crest factor. And the higher your crest factor is, the more it differentiates, the less powerful your signal is. And the smaller your crest factor is, the punchier, the more upfront your perceived loudness will be. We can choose to control the level of the whole distortion right here. So let's enable our drive again, and now we just have to decrease the level. So it's sounding completely fucked up, but what I want to show you is watch the perceived loudness. Perceived loudness is now here without our distortion at -9, and now we add the distortion, and it is kind of around -9 or -10 now, but the actual transient is like, it's 9 dB lower or 7 dB lower. So now we could theoretically turn up the whole signal because it's not taking up so much headroom in our mastering or in our whole mix in the end. So this is interesting. So we don't use distortion just to make the sound grittier. We also use distortion to decrease the crest factor, which will make the whole sound louder, and that's pretty cool. So that's just what I wanted to show you, why we use distortion. Alright, so of course this is way too much because it's just messing up our whole signal. So we'll just get to a point where it's doing good things for our signal. So let's see. So somewhere here it's getting super squashed. Okay, so let's switch through the different types of distortion. So the different types of distortion, they just create different harmonics, inharmonics, and more even, more odd harmonics. So this is just adding and emphasizing different overtones in the overtone spectrum. Soft clip is more punchy. This is adding more like clicky transients to the sound. And so now without the distortion, our perceived loudness is lower and our actual transient is higher. But if we enable our distortion, our perceived loudness will be louder and the actual transient will be quieter. And that's so nice, that's so nice. Yeah. So now with this kind of distortion, you're just completely messing up your signal, but it is, as you can see, increasing the perceived loudness super heavily. Same thing here. Okay, I don't know what this kind of stuff does not work with so much drive, sorry. It's also not bad, of course, too much. It's really bringing out the low end. Nope. 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 So this kind of saturation works very well. Alright, great. So this is what you use distortion for, and this is how we will use distortion also in other patches. So interesting thing we can do with this distortion, we can go and click on our level again to switch to our mix. And now we can use envelope free, which is our free envelope. We didn't use it on anything, and to use it just on a mix. And now we blend in the distortion, but in a very rhythmical way, with our sustain turned down as usual, since our decay turned down. So this will add even more pluckiness to our sound. So let's have a listen if this works here. So now with this kind of distortion, you just create different harmonics, inharmonics, and more even, more odd harmonics. So this is just adding and emphasizing different overtones in the sound. So let's have a listen if this works here. without our distortion, more transient, more actual transient, but less perceived loudness. With our blended in rhythmical distortion, with our envelope free, we have more perceived loudness and less actual transient. This is pretty cool. Alright, so those kind of bass lines of this whole like afterlife kind of stuff, they have sometimes a delay going on. So inside this delay we have our BPM right here, so the rhythm that it's playing in, and we have this little offset down here. So let's just have a listen to how this sounds like without tweaking it. It's not really doing anything but delaying the signal, and we should put this in front of our distortion, because our distortion will really like control our transients. So now if we just add a little bit of variation here, so this will just make variation to our stereo field, to the delay. Now it will get super stereo. So let's not mix this for 100%, but somewhere in the middle. And now we can apply this a filter here. Just adds a little bit of stereo information to our signal. Alright, so now we can add a cue. We could, blend in more highs here, or get rid of some of our lows, but I think our lows are pretty nice at the moment, so just adding a little bit of high end here. And now that's what I meant. Now we can even go back to our oscillator section and try playing around with the filter steepness, a little bit the cutoff position here, the envelope true amount of the filter. So because this is all going into our distortion and then out to our delay, it will have a big difference. It's just too closed now. It's lacking of groove a little bit. Alright, so I think we're good to go, and we can try to blend this bassline with our kick. So let's get rid of this limiter here, and now I will use a compressor to apply sidechaining. So let's drop this drop-down menu here, enable the sidechain, choose audio from our kick drum. Let's choose peak mode here in the compressor so it works fast, and now we can just drag down the threshold. Now already starts moving around. And now with our kick, we have this super fat bass line. Now we can even start, just to see where it's blending nicely with the kick. That would be too low. Just try it without our second oscillator. Sub is doing great here. Alright, so I'll just save this preset, and then I will say thanks for watching this very first part, and we will see each other in the next process of patching. Bye bye. Alright, welcome to our second patch. Now we will create a stab, what are stab sounds? They're like the super epic, groovy kind of sounds that you hear in nearly every melodic techno production. So have a listen to what we will do now. So this was the sound. It is a very short, deep and aggressive sound. So those are like the primary aspects. So short means we need short envelopes. Deep means we need deep kind of sounds. So lower registers, maybe also higher registers, and aggressiveness will come together by using FM synthesis and distortion. So we will dive right into patching, and I will show you how to make this patch. Alright, so let's start patching by choosing a different saw wave. Let's choose this DS saw and triangle wave, and now we can click through our patches. It's sounding like this at the moment. so not very spectacular. And we will continue directly to our next primary aspect, or to our first primary aspect, which is then the FM synthesis. So basically I'm just going to create this FM's type of sound, and then we're going to filter it and create this really nice and plucky sound. Okay, so let's enable oscillator B. And so how do you apply FM synthesis? What is FM synthesis? It's called frequency modulation, and I'm not a crazy huge expert of how exactly this it comes together in technical terms, but you have a modulator and you have a carrier, and the modulator is modulating the frequency of the carrier. One oscillator is modulating the frequency of the other one, and this will just give a very interesting sound to the waveform. So let's start by clicking in this drop down menu right here, and there are a lot of different kind of wave modulating modes here, and as well there is this FM from B mode, and this is what we will use always for our FM synthesis here inside Serum. So let's click this and turn down oscillator B. Alright, so for this kind of FM synthesis sounds, we need to choose a waveform that is a little bit more overtone rich, and it's a little bit weirder than this kind of plain and normal saw wave. So we just go into a drop down menu right here, and now there is this waveform called MB triangle in metal. So we'll choose this one, and you can see, you know, the more bumps you have here, the weirder the wave will sound. So let's just have a listen to our B wave. This is how it sounds. But we'll leave the level turned down, and now we can play it back and it's not doing anything. Why is that the case? Because we have to enable our FM modulation by turning up this knob here. So this would be clearly too much, it's destroying the wave. It's somewhere around 12 o'clock. It's working out pretty nicely. Alright, so let's just insert a arpeggiator in front of our Serum synth, just to have some, you know, we'll put the rate to 16th notes here, so we have just some rhythmical stuff without me having to press it all the time here. Cool. So this is how the sound sounds now. We've just added, you know, a lot of like this metal kind of sound to our wave. Now this is not really deep enough, so we will choose to pitch down our oscillator A by 2 octaves. And now you get this really grippy feeling. You can switch around through the different wavetable positions. This one sounds really good together with this. Alright, so let's start and enable the filter. Let's choose a higher filter slope so we get more pluckiness here. And then we'll go to envelope 2 and let envelope 2 control the filter. This is standard, you know, nearly in every patch I do this. So you go here, you don't choose bipolar type of modulation, you choose unipolar, so it's just one direction. And now we'll have to decrease the sustain time here, decrease the decay a little bit, so we really get this kind of plucky sound. A little bit release time. Let's choose mono in the voicing so we don't have any notes clashing. Maybe we can add a little bit of release time on our envelope 1. Yes. Alright, and now we can add drive and fatness to our sound here. And yeah, we're already on a good way. Alright, so how can we add more to this sound? You know, I want to show you how to do like this exact melodic techno sounds, but I also want to show you like how you can create your own sounds inside Serum and develop your own FM synthesis style. So you can just choose different kind of waveforms here. So as we switch through our wavetable position, we can just go and select, you know, just some other wavetables here and see what it's doing. So we can just click through our wavetables and just have a listen to how the sound behaves. It's a little bit more squarey here. Thinner. Oh, also not bad. Maybe our release time is a little bit long. If you would like to add, you know, like stereo information, you can do this by adding unison voices to your oscillator. Thinner. So let's add some noise to our sound. So we'll enable the noise oscillator and we choose envelope 2 to control the level of our noise. And again, we will choose bright white here. And we also want our noise to go inside our filter, so we have to enable this here. A little bit more. So this is kind of, you know, you want to open up your filter here and then you want to listen to how much noise comes through your filter, because if your filter is closed down you can add super much noise, but you will not hear that it's wrong, you know. But if it sounds like this, when you open up the filter, it's way too much noise. So not there, here it's coming in slowly. I don't know if we need any resonance, but I would just recommend you, if you're doing this kind of patches, play around with all the different parameters just to get a feeling of how this sounds like. And then you will also, at a certain point, you will hear a track and you will be like, ah, okay, this is the kind of modulation this person did because you did it by yourself. Right, so let's try adding a sub oscillator. So now the sub oscillator is not, you know, it's not going into our filter. And it's not being controlled by any like tighter level envelope. So this is why it sounds not really coherent with the rest of our waves at the moment. So we can just try to use maybe our last envelope here on our level, drag down the level and let the envelope free control it completely. Let's turn down the sustain, so we'll just, you know, add a similar kind of shorter envelope to our sub bass, but not the one from envelope 2, because I think maybe it's just too short. Let's add a little bit of release to our third envelope. And so now if you choose a sub wave that has overtones, because a sine wave is just plain sine wave, no overtones, no high frequency information, I would recommend you to turn on your sub filter mapping so that your sub oscillator is going into your filter as well. So now maybe, I don't know, we can disable random phase here and also search for a point where it's really fat. You see how it changes? It's so much different. So what happens if we change the random phase on our modulator here? Let's turn down the random phase and let's search for a spot that fits us. Yes, pretty nice right there. Pretty nice attack. Alright, so I think that's pretty good for our like basic sound design part here. Now we can have a look at our FX section and start dialing in some delay, reverb and distortion. Okay, maybe we'll just close the cutoff a little bit more and add a little bit more envelope. So, the more envelope you add and the more your filter is closed with more envelope, the tighter and the punchier it will be in the end, because there's a lot of modulation going on. Okay, so let's go to our FX section and now just enable our delay here and let's just hear how it sounds like. Okay, sounds okay. What is interesting about delay and time and spectral based effects like choruses and reverb and all that stuff is either we have a delay that is, just repeating our tonal material, so like this, dun dun dun, or we do the delay more subtly and it just blends in with the signal nicer, and then this will lead to a more high quality sound, because the sound is not like just randomly disappearing, or it's just not disappearing so abruptly. Okay, so how do we do this? We have to make our delay less obvious and shorter, because the shorter we make the delay, the closer it will be to our original signal, and therefore it will blend with our original signal much nicer. So let's choose 16th and maybe 132 note right here, and now we can have a listen. Now we can play with the filter to make it just a little bit thinner, and if we make the second part of our sound, which is the delay, thinner, of course our first one will sound fatter because we have this difference. So now it already sounds like it's just there's this more delay information that's fading out. So maybe this is a little bit too much mix and a little bit too much feedback. Maybe we can choose time modulation right here, so it's getting even more stereo. Okay, so let's add some reverb. So you have these two reverb modes right here with Hall and Plate. Plate is per default a little bit more mono, so we have to increase the width here. They are just sounding a little bit different. So as I said, we just want our sound to have a nice fade out. We don't want to necessarily use a reverb. You can also use a reverb for really to increase the tail of your sound super long, So if we increase the size here, we have like this. But this is not something we want here, because you would use this kind of a reverb, like super long reverb, more on either high dreamy stuff, like ARP, so it's creating this nice background pad, or on like single steps, so just one step. So we can enable low cut here and decrease the size. Maybe we even high cut it a little bit more. Alright, so also here we will use some distortion. So let's get rid of our mix right here. Let's choose our level, add some distortion and go down with the level. Oops. Okay, so now we can switch through our different distortion types. Let's just try this diode 1 and 2, because they're adding really nice deeper harmonics to our sound. That's way too much. That's way too much, so let's decrease the mix. Like this, it's just, getting grippier, it gets distorted, therefore deeper and nicer. You could even try this trick, where we bring in the mix with our envelope. let's hear this sound again with our filter opening. So it's clear, or it's obvious, that the more open our filter will be, the more high-end information will come through, and because distortion is creating high-end information, it's not that obvious when you have your filter opened up. So I would recommend adding distortion when your filter is closed down. And I'm always speaking of this filter is open, filter is closed, because later on in our production process, when we do a melody with this and automation, we will use the filter cutoff automation. So here, now it's a little, if you close it like this, it's just a little bit too much distortion. Just destroying the nice plugginess a little bit. I think this is enough. Let's try a different mode here. This is working even better. So now what we can do, what is interesting, is we can choose our distortion to be after our spatial effects. So now our distortion will also affect our delay and reverb, and maybe bring out, because its distortion is hardcore compression, it will bring out our stereo material even more. Not too much difference here. I think we are good to go from here, so we can add a little bit of EQ. And now you can hear the reverb is coming out because we're boosting the high frequencies. This would be clearly too much. So this is, like how to behave when patching. It's like you can just, crank up and down the knobs really hard and see where it gets super, if you're changing the sound too hard, it may be too much. Alright, so let's try some compression on this sound. Get the threshold more down. Now we can increase our makeup gain. Let's play around with the attack. So I want to emphasize the attack time. So we need a little bit longer attack time. So the first transient cuts through, and then we lead a kind of medium or short release time. So because we're playing a fast rhythm, it needs to, get back to the level of 0 again. Like this, the attack is not coming through. So we can also try this reverb after everything. Alright, so now you can just play around with this patch and do whatever you want to this patch. Hyperdimension. We'll add a lot more stereo information to the signal. And especially this dimension knob can be interesting. You hear this is like, it's kind of like chorus, delay, whatever thing programmed in there. I don't know how exactly this dimension is working, but it's adding this kind of, fade out short delay. Hi there, welcome to the next patch. This will be a fluffy ARP patch, and yeah, so let's just dive in. What is an arpeggio? Arpeggio is an arpeggiated sequence of notes. So basically I think it comes out of classical music, where you have, just a triad or a chord, and then you pull the different strings on your violin or whatever that are inside that chord. So for that kind of note information, we would have to insert a arpeggiator in front of our Serum instance. So if I hit a triad, it will arpeggiate that triad in a certain rhythm or rate that we can choose here, for example a 16th rate. and how to make nice melodies with this. We will learn this in the next part of the whole course. Now we will just focus on the sound design part. Alright, so have a listen to the patch that we will create now. Okay, so let's start the patch, and so we will talk about arpeggios. What are the primary aspects of arpeggios? They are sounds that are mostly in higher octaves. They are pretty, like, most of the time they're more short, so they're not really legato. There is a lot of modulation, and most of the time there's also a lot of, like, you know, reverb and delay kind of stuff going on, so it's very a spatial sound. So this is what we'll do now. Okay, so let's start by, again, decreasing our sustain, decreasing our decay time, increasing our release time a little bit, so our sound gets pluckier. And now we'll choose this envelope 1 to control again the level of our oscillator A, so we get like a 2 times as plucky sound as if we would just leave it the way it's per default. And now, I mean, what does fluffiness means? It means we have a little bit of attack time, and that's one of the most interesting parts of this patch. So if you start adding attack time here, it will get this attack. And you really have to hit a sweet spot here. 5 milliseconds is too slow. It's something around 20 and 30 milliseconds, because if it's longer, you know, it will drag a lot. It will just be too slow. Okay, so now we'll play with the attack and decay time here. And another thing I want to show you is, if you have this thing called gate, and so people kind of never use it. I didn't use it too much, but it's getting interesting if you're playing with this short sound. So let's have a listen to what happens to the sound if we turn up the gate or turn down the gate. It's crazy how it changes, right? So if we go into the direction of less percent here, our sound will get more like kind of, it gets a squashier feel. Like here it's super like, it's super staccato and super like, how do I explain it? It's super like tight, which is also nice, but like if we turn down the gate a little bit, our release time is also coming through a little bit more. Alright, so that's it for like our first envelope section, and fluffiness also means that we have some noise going on. So again, we will choose our analog bright white here, choose our envelope 1 to control the level of this noise and dial it in. And now we can just go directly to our FX section, because a primary aspect, as I said in the beginning of this patch, is a delay and reverb. So just enable this both effects right here. What kind of delay do we want here? This time we want a delay that's really set apart from our sound. So it's not this kind of delay that we made earlier, which is, you know, just adding to the release time of the sound, and it's very close to the sound, but this should really add different rhythms and should be clearly audible. So we can choose some time modulation here, increase the feedback a little bit more. Maybe add some reverb. Let's just try play it, increase the width, increase the size. Let's play around with the filter of the delay. Let's low cut the reverb a little bit. Let's high cut it as well. Maybe we can add this kind of hyper dimension, but not the hyper one, but the dimension one. Okay, so now a pretty interesting effect is as well the compressor, but not the compressor in its standard settings, but in its multiband setting. So let's put the compressor behind our delay and reverb and our hyperdimension and enable the multiband compression and just hear to how different it sounds. It's really bringing up, and then it's pushing up the delay and reverb a lot. I think it's too much, so we'll just decrease the mix here. And what most people don't know, you can actually drag this kind of bars right here, and the more you're on the left, you know, there's this H displayed, the less highs you will have. So I think there are a lot of highs at the moment, so we'll just drag this to the left so the highs are not over compressed. Okay, so we could even try to do this compressor in front of our delay and reverb if this was too much of compression. We could even try to, you know, play around with the delay time of the delay here. Okay, so another interesting thing that you can do is you can add LFO modulation, so a little bit vibrato to your sound. And you do this just by dragging the LFO1 to your fine-tune knob, and now you can go to your matrix, or you go inside here and just drag down the amount, because now it will be super sloppy, drunken. And we don't want this to be that slow. I think vibrato works with this kind of short sounds better if it's fast. Because now it feels like a very short, more like wrong pitch modulation on the whole sound. And if it's fast, you can actually hear it because it will cycle kind of through the whole pitch modulation in the time of one note playing. Sorry, sometimes music production is super logical and a little bit techy, but yeah, I hope I can explain this good to you. Okay, so faster vibrato. Okay, so if we want more spaciness, we can add unison to the sound. Alright, so let's try adding a second oscillator, and of course we need envelope 1 to control the level here as well. And now we can go and just switch through a different kind of shapes here. And you know what makes sense is to not do like the same octave, but maybe an octave higher or lower, so it adds another dimension to the sound. Maybe we also want LFO1 control the pitch of the second oscillator. Okay, so now we can just switch through the different oscillators and just have a listen to how they sound like. This one is doing great. Maybe a little bit more level here. So what is also interesting, if you have like, you know, one oscillator is super wide and the other one is in the middle, so you get a little bit more stability in the center of your sound. And of course, what you can always do is just, add more echo, like inside your DAW, and even more reverb. So those sounds, like sometimes they're so spatial. And of course, I will only work with, the built-in reverb and delay algorithms. But if you have something like Black Hole, Valhalla, Shimmer, Vintage Verb, whatever nice reverb you have, try it, because it will sound just a little bit nicer. So let's have a listen. So that's it with our basic setup. We don't necessarily need a filter for its envelope in this patch, but we can just try, like over the course of a track. So let's just enable all the different inputs here from the different oscillators. You could blend this in with your filter. So the filter is more like a kind of automation thing, so it's coming here. Maybe we need a reverb that's super long and very, very much in the background. So we get this, super mystical feel. Yeah. Maybe some drive and fatness. There are a lot of low informations here, so maybe we can just add an EQ and get rid of a little bit of the lows. Yeah. Okay, so just to give it a little bit more drive, let's add some distortion here. And we will also use our envelope one on our mix knob. Turn on the mix, enable it, turn up the drive. And let's switch through the different distortion types. It's getting really angry now. It's a little bit brrrt. Okay, so a lot of times in these productions, the stuff is coming out of a space. So let's have a look at our macros here, and we'll go to our FX section, take macro 2 and put it doesn't matter which macro you use, put it on your delay mix, and we put it on our reverb mix. So now if we crank up this macro, you will have your melody that we will write later on. And you will automate this. And you can just push it in the back. So let's call this just the space knob. So yeah, that's a pretty cool, neat thing. So you can, with macros, you can just, sum up automational signals. So you just pick your spatial effect. So we could also use like the hyper here. just push it way to the back. Alright, so that's it for the fluffy ARP patch. I hope you enjoyed, and we'll just save this, and of course all those patches are available in the download section for you, and we'll see each other in the next patch. Bye bye. Okay, so now we will have a look at this LFO pad that you can hear here. Alright, so this is also a classy melodic techno patch that you can use for your productions, and it's our first multi-voiced patch. By that I mean it's polyphonic, it's not monophonic, and it's also our first patch where our primary aspects differ a little bit. That being said, our primary aspects of this patch is, of course, it's poly material, so we will not choose to reduce our voicing to mono. It's good if it's left to poly, because we want to insert different notes here. Then we will control like the fluffiness of the patch. We will control it with an LFO. So there is this LFO modulations on several parameters. That's super important. And it's also a very spatial sound. So those are the primary aspects. I would say like secondary aspects of this patch are which oscillator you use, which wavetable. This is more personal taste and not that important on this patch. And also like kind of if you choose to have a sub oscillator and a second oscillator, this is just completely up to you. Let's start patching this also very fluffy LFO pad. So we have our oscillator A, and this one is going to be a very spatial patch. So we can, for our spatiality, we can increase our unison here and reduce the detune, so it's not, you know, so crazily detuned, because sometimes it's just, I mean, this is also a pretty cool production trick. I've mentioned this earlier in our sound design course. This is something I guess, for example, Boris Brecher is doing in kind of his build-up chords. So he's like having this, and then it's creating tension, 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 and then release. So you can also automate your detune knob. It's a cool way of creating tension, but that's a different topic. So now we just want to focus on our LFO pad. This will be just done by taking the LFO1 and decreasing the level. So LFO1 is having maximum effect by increasing the amount of LFO affecting the level. So let's hear what we have now. And now let's deactivate our BPM rate here and switch to Hertz here. And now you can already hear in the where we're going to end. You know, like this. Okay, so this is already doing a pretty good job. So we'll also choose to have some white noise in our patch. So we'll enable bright white again, choose LFO1 to control the level, drag down the level so it's having maximum impact. Yeah, I think like this it's pretty good. And for our main envelope, we just increase the release here and add a little bit of attack. So, you know, without your release, it would just suddenly stop, which is super unnatural. And then it's gone. So we can add a little bit of LFO modulation on our pitch, so vibrato to say it in classical terms. Let's decrease the amount here. Okay, so Ableton has this chord FX. This is a MIDI effect in front of my patch. It will be there automatically in front of it. And now we can just add different intervals here. So then I can play one note and it will play this chord, so I don't have to, you know, go crazy with my computer keyboard here. So we can choose by clicking Shift and the up arrow, we can jump 12 semitones up, so we just have an octave. And then we will do some intervals. So we will do a minor chord. A lot of this music is written in minor. How many semitones has a minor third? It has 1, 2, 3 semitones. So we'll 3 semitones right here. And then a fifth has 7 semitones, so plus 7. And we will increase our release time again. Cool, so now we can go to LFO1. And maybe we can even add a, how is it called, Dezime in German. So this is 15 semitones, so that's the third of the chord, but an octave higher. Okay, so now the sound has too much low end for my taste. So to make this one really fluffy, we just decrease the low end here by just, you know, dragging down the gain of the lower band of the EQ. And we can add some hyper and dimension. I like the dimension more. I'm just playing like random notes here on my keyboard. We could try by just differentiate or like varying the shape here of the LFO. Maybe it's making a nicer, maybe it's adding to the sound if it's a little bit smoother like this. Like this it's tighter. I like it tighter. Maybe we can try some glide here on our patch. And let's choose always so we don't have to play legato, so the glide is working. A little bit much noise. You can even play with the smoothness of the LFO. It's just evening out the bumps a little bit. Great, so let's add more FX here. We will go with a delay. And for this, you know, I'm also a huge fan of presets actually. Not always, because we also want to, you know, be able to patch those kind of things by ourselves. But to get inspiration, sometimes it's just cool to flip around through different presets and then it's like, ah, cool, this is what I needed. So there are actually presets inside Serum of the effect. So if you have this little drop down menu here and we can just choose dub delay, for example. And now we can just have a listen what this will make with our sound. This is super long. And you know, this is pretty cool for productions because if there's always something going on in the background, it will be enough interest for the listener, you know? So you can really just play this kind of one chord thing. So you have this. And it's a little bit too much mix here. But you know, then the ear will be satisfied because the sound is still there and now the whole instrumental can play and you don't have to play chords all the time to create interest because there is this space going on. So let's continue and switch through the presets a little bit more. I like this one, maybe less mix. Yes, this is cool. Okay, so let's add reverb and we can also switch through some of the presets right here. Very long, maybe cut some of the lows. Decrease the mix. This is already so much fun to play with. Okay, so let's add some more space effects. Let's add some chorus. It's just creating this nice spaciness in the mid-range. Okay, so that's pretty cool for the FX section. So now we can just try to, you know, add another oscillator, add a sub oscillator, and then switch through the different wavetables because now all of our primary aspects there are set. You know, that's enough. The LFO pad, it is what it is now. It is a nice LFO pad, and now you can just add your personal ingredients and spice to the soup by adding oscillators and choosing different waveforms. Okay, so let's add another oscillator, and of course we have to add our LFO1 to the level of the second one. And now we'll choose a different octave just to make the patch fuller and yeah, so it's not clashing inside the same octave. Let's just click through the presets. Maybe we can add the second LFO to our oscillator B as well and do a little bit more detune here. So the second one is a little bit more washed out. And this is very obvious. Okay. It's a little bit like a chipmunky style. I don't like this. This one sounds good. Okay, let's add a sub oscillator. And of course we have to use LFO1 on our level, otherwise it would not blend with the other oscillators. So you know, you could now you could go to macro 1, add this to the level of this one, and then you could, you know, just like if time you go on through your patch, it just adds more of this low information. And of course here we can also add this kind of spatial trick. Let's just put them all together here and add our macro 2 to our mix of the chorus, of our verb and of our delay. Alright, so that's it for our fourth patch pad. It's called LFO pad, and I hope you enjoyed. Of course, you will find this patch also in the download section right here. And my name is Yannick Mounts. I'm a producer, DJ, sound designer, and in German we say Tausendsasser from Berlin. And I hope I could bring you just some nice and helpful information right here. See you in the next patch. Hey there, welcome to the next patch. Now we will do something which is not very similar but kind of in the direction of our second patch called Fat Step. So this one is our fifth patch called Brutal Step, and let's have a listen. The main difference between this one and our second one is that this will be super wide and even more aggressive than the first one. So primary aspects of this patch are it is also a very rhythmical patch, so envelopes need to be, or something in this patch needs to be plucky, and if it's plucky we need envelopes that make it short or make a movement that's short. So either our envelope 1 will be short or we will use our filter to make it short by filtering it out in a very short way. So it's a short sound, it's spacey and wide, but not too spacey, so not like the pad that we just made. It will be super brutal and fat, and that means there are a lot of FM synthesis in here. There are a lot of different oscillators stacking up, and there is distortion going on. And our secondary aspects are kind of which exact kind of FM modulation you want to use and which kind of wave you want to use for your modulator and your carrier. That's more or less up to you. I will recommend a couple of FM modulators that work pretty well for this kind of aggressive sounds to you. And yeah, secondly, it's also if you want to have your sub oscillator shaped in a certain way, if you want to have a little bit of pitch modulation on your fine tuning and all this kind of stuff. So, without further talking, let's start and patch. So now we're again inside our Ableton Live, so I'll just search for a arpeggiator here. So again, I don't have to, press rhythms like a loco one. Cool, so that's our basic patch. So we'll just go here and choose our basic shapes, and we'll choose this saw wave right here. So it really doesn't matter if you choose this one or the first one. The good thing is we can switch through our wavetable positions later on here and have a listen how it sounds with different wavetables. Alright, so we are creating a brutal step. So we will add some pluckiness by turning down the sustain, increasing the release a little bit, and turning down the decay time right here. And we said we want to have it spacey, so we'll increase our unison. Okay, so let's enable oscillator B as we use it as a modulator for our oscillator A carrier. We won't need the level to be turned up here, but we need our FM from B to be enabled right here. So now let's increase this knob, and now oscillator B will now frequency modulate oscillator A. Okay, so now it's not really sounding so special, but that's because we need to lower the octave here so we get this fatness. Okay, so you could either lower the octave of your oscillator B, the modulator, or of your carrier. And we will have a look at what is better now. But before we do that, I want to show you some spectral waveform or wavetables that work pretty well here. So there's this one called Monster 2. So let's have a listen and let's just play with the wavetable position so it gets a little bit more. So, you can click here and see the whole wavetable right here and switch through it. That's pretty nice in Serum. You can see that here. And the more bumps we get, the more aggressive it will be. But FM modulation is working better if you have different octaves in your carrier and your modulators. So now let's turn down the octave on our oscillator B. So now we get really angry. So let's try the same thing with our oscillator A. So we'll put this up and we'll try oscillator A down 2 octaves. And it's a different sound. If we put down oscillator B, which is the modulator, it will not sound as clean as if we turn down oscillator A. So as a rule of thumb, I would say you should either turn down oscillator A by 2 octaves or the oscillator that's not the modulator, the oscillator that's a carrier, because then you will get a cleaner sound. Alright, so that's it for our oscillator A, oscillator B octave values. I will show you some of the other waveforms inside this oscillator B that work well. In general, all those monster waveforms work pretty well, so we can just flip through them. So this is a kind of where you find, your own style in your FM synthesis by just, choosing always the same carrier and the same modulator. So we can now also have a look at some of the other waveforms here, which is called Grimace. I think this one is also very nice. It's a little bit more squarey sounding. So yeah, those are all the spectral ones are basically great, but we will continue with the monster one. So maybe we can just turn off random phase here as well. It's not doing too much here. This is actually doing a lot. So the more random phase you will have, the more random like your unison will be panned around your headphones or around your stereo field. So this is like kind of how you get that under control. So you can add more voices here, which will then result, if you have the Gene Tune cranked up, in a more stereo kind of feel. But you can also decrease the randomness and therefore decrease the whole stereo width and make it more like mono compatible. It also sounds more concrete. Okay, so let's play around with the decay and release here a little bit. So I would recommend, you just make a faster ARP rhythm, then you see is it working nicely in all the settings. Is it working nicely with 16th note, with 32 notes, with quarter notes, etc. Too short. How much release? So with this patch, if you have this long of a release, you hear if you play like fast melodies, it will be clashing. So we've set this voicing to mono, and maybe we can also implement some glide here. Okay, this already sounds pretty fat. So let's enable noise, put our envelope 1 to our level of our noise. Let's choose again our bright white here. We can go to 16th notes here again. And now we can increase our pluckiness and make it even pluckier and more shaped by enabling our filter. We want our noise to be going through our filter as well. Turn down the cutoff. Let's use envelope to control the cutoff opening frequency. Decrease the decay time. Now it's not that flowy. We need to increase the release. You hear the release is so important here. Like this, it's just super unnatural because it's like, and with more release, it's getting more flowy. You can try different filter slopes. Let's go down an octave. That's too deep. And then later on we can do like this. Okay, that already sounds pretty good to me. So let's go to our FX section. And now we want to add a little bit of dimension, but the kind of dimension that's more, emphasizing the release time and not creating any too crazy delays. So let's add hyper dimension, turn down the mix of the hyper and enable the mix here of the dimension. And by itself, this is not really working because it's adding this kind of dimension, but it's just standing there. So that's why we need to combine hyper and dimension with delay. Very short delay here again. 16th and 32 notes work well. Let's decrease the frequency spectrum here to just somewhere in the middle. And now we can, I don't know if we want to add distortion in front or in the back of our synth. So let's try to get our mix controlled by envelope 3, also set to a very short. So now you have 3 envelopes that modulate one the level, the second the filter, and the third the distortion level. So you have 3 times emphasizing a rhythm, like a short movement inside your sound with your different envelope shapes. So this is creating this, very deep but very short and thick sound. Let's switch through our distortion presets. Let's add some reverb, not too much lows, not too much highs. think the glide is a little bit too long. So we can add macro 1 to our cutoff, and then we can call this like open up. And then maybe we can even just use, like, pull the sustain fully up on our envelope 1 and use the envelope 2 for our like pluckiness control. Oh, I think it's a lot of noise. Okay. Let's try and play around with the gate here. Maybe we find a nicer and smoother setting. I don't know if we like the sustain if it's turned up. Okay, so let's try a sub oscillator here to give it a little bit more lows. Not doing too much here. Oh yeah, I think -1 octave works well here. Just adding this kind of mid sound that we were missing. Maybe we have a little bit too much delays going on. Yep. Okay, so now we will add some compression, turn down the threshold, again to emphasize the attack time. Okay, maybe we can try some LFO modulation on our pitch just to make it a little bit more, fucked up. Disable the BPM here again. Okay. Maybe we'll just play around with the order here. Put the distortion after the compressor. Oh no. Makes more sense in front of it. So we'll play with the drive here. Less decay time here. Maybe we need to control the level of our sub as well, so it's blending nicer with the rest of the oscillators. Alright, so I think we're pretty good with our basic setup here. So again, we can add this room trick. So just put a macro on our spatial FX here and try this. Maybe we need to increase the size of the reverb as well so it's working. I don't know. I'll just remove this modulator by right-clicking. Okay, I think this one is working pretty well. What you can always do with your patches is just add more saturation afterwards. Not a lot, but you know, this kind of saturation, sometimes it's just emphasizing nice harmonics of your sound, and the deepness will get cut through even more. And of course you can add more spatial effects as we did with some of the previous patches afterwards. So really, like the melodic techno game, it's really a lot about space and spatial effects. Just a little bit, and I think I want something faster here. It's too much. Alright, so that's it with our brutal step. Yeah, so now we've, set it up all our primary aspects, and now we could of course go and switch through our basic shapes here. Oh, it's getting super thin here. Watch out. Let's try it with different waveforms. This one is pretty cool. That's it for our brutal step.